Told city leaders that Britain is weary after 7 years of hard slog. So is austerity really over? And should it be? We're here to tell us Faiza Shaheen. She's Director of the Centre for Labour and Social Studies, and Daniel Mahoney. He's Deputy Director of the Centre for Policy Studies. So Faiza, start with you. Nick Macpherson, the former first Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, wrote in the FT last week, Britain actually hasn't had austerity. Do you agree?
No, I don't agree. I think when you look across public services, so even mental health budgets, 8% cuts, NHS schools, I mean, all of those parents that got letters home from their head teachers saying that they don't have enough money. I mean, what was that? Was that not to do with the cuts? We know nurses going to food banks. The cuts have had huge social consequences, and actually economically as well haven't worked the way that Osborne, who was the original architect, wanted them to work. So every time they've missed targets, we had the slowest recovery in modern history. We had wages stagnating. We saw consumer debt, private household debt back up to pre-financial crash levels. So it has been a failure. Nick
Macpherson's point, though, is that government spending has carried on rising year after year. You know, there hasn't been a year when it's fallen. It's risen every year. The debt to GDP ratio has also risen from, I think, 76 to 89%, whereas Ireland, he would argue, genuinely did have austerity and it's seen its debt to GDP ratio fall.
So the thing is with the austerity policy is that it's like looking at the telescope through the wrong end. So the way in which you cut debt, public debt, is to create or help stimulate more good job creation, which means that the tax take goes up. Now, we haven't seen that. We've seen the type of bad job creation, 0 hours, more people in precarious work, and that has meant that that tax take hasn't come. So, you know, it has been a failure in the sense that you don't cut yourself out of debt. You have to try and grow yourself out, and we haven't seen that growth in the way that we would need to see it.
So, Daniel, Philip Hammond today basically said people have had 7 years of hard slog. Should he now change course?
Well, no, he shouldn't change course, and actually he did say that we won't change course. The Conservative Party has quite a modest deficit reduction plan, so it's only planning a surplus in 2025-26. So that would mean we've been running a deficit for a quarter of a century, so that's the longest period since the Second World War, so that's quite a long time. So any softening of that programme would be a big risk to the UK. And I think when it comes to the austerity package, you know, as you said, I think overall spending is around flat. I think it's gone up slightly, but it's been very unbalanced. So some departmental budgets have faced big cuts, but other budgets, so the international aid budget, pensioner benefits, they've seen quite big increases. So I think that sort of there needs to be a bit of rebalancing there, but I think the overall package, there does need to be, you know, some restraint.
I mean, the fact that he's pushed the deficit reduction target back to the middle of the next decade, the middle of the next parliament, and I mean, is that because he's assuming there's going to be lower growth post-Brexit, essentially?
I think so, and the OBR, I think, makes that assumption as well. I think it's slightly unfair to criticise George Osborne for missing his target. After all, in the early part of the fiscal consolidation period, there was the Eurozone crisis, which did have a dampening effect on growth. And I think some people argue that fiscal consolidation, you know, caused that. I think the evidence very much suggests otherwise. Not just the Eurozone crisis, there was also, you know, high commodity prices and things like that. So, you know, there has been very strong growth since then. So 2014 and 2016, very strong growth, and, you know, some of the highest in the G7.
So look, the Second World War, when we had high levels of debt, how did they get us out of that? They invested. We created jobs, we put that public investment in, and that meant we paid off the debt. That's a really good example, actually.
Except we didn't pay off our war debts until a couple of years ago.
It came down dramatically. It came down dramatically. Look, historically, we didn't have high levels of debt until we bailed out the banks and the financial crisis happened. So we have to take that into account. Now, what you do to grow yourself... Look at countries like Italy. They have lower levels of debt than us, but are they countries we want to be like?
They have high levels of debt to GDP.
Yes, so if you look at public ownership, if you look at debt and how much they're taking out per year. You know, so you see these countries that actually the focus on debt is not helpful. What we should be focusing on, especially at a time of Brexit, especially at a time when we need to be recalibrating the economy, making sure we get through this tough time, is to focus on growth, is to focus on how to stimulate that, is to think about the ways in which we can make sure we have an economy ready for climate change, for automation, for those big things that are happening. And the focus on the debt is just an unhelpful way of looking at the issue.
Can I just say on the Second World War point, I think that is a bit of a...
Daniel, sorry, we're right out of time. I do apologise. Faiza, Daniel, thanks for joining me both. You've been watching Ian King Live. A reminder, there's video content and analysis on the business page of the Sky News website, plus